I got to, and even then, their unemployment rate is like 34% right now. And so it's, and as I said earlier, they don't enforce socialism nearly as militantly as Venezuela does. And in that same time frame, they only took over 20 companies. Well, Venezuela took over like 1,100. So it's, they call themselves socialists, but they're very little lax.
But by your own argument, the United States is at least partially socialist. It's not an on or off, either or. That many countries borrow socialist policies. I think we mentioned, some of the Great Society programs, Medicare and Medicaid. So, how does that sort of change the argument, knowing that it's not either we're fully capitalist or we're fully socialist, but that you probably put every country on its spectrum?
I'd say historically, every time America has shifted towards the socialist side of the spectrum, life has gotten much worse. When FDR took over the economy with the New Deal and prolonged the Great Depression by 7 years is what UCLA predicted. If he had just let prices adjust on themselves, then the Great Depression would have been over 7 years earlier.
Also, the U.S. is not fully capitalist, not because of the social programs we have, but because of the regulations we place on businesses. So what you're talking about is like social programs and like a welfare state, and I think that's a completely different argument we should have, which is not.
That's a good question. At what point should the government step in and regulate private business? Are there any scenarios where you envision that's appropriate?
I mean, I think there's some scenarios like during the Industrial Revolution, child labor laws were passed, and I think that's a good thing. Government's regulating like the amount of hours a person can work, and then they have to be paid overtime. I think that's another good example.
What about now, 2019?
I'd say the government's too involved right now in 2019.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'd say the government's right now too involved in the American economy in 2019.
So what specifically?
I'd say the minimum wage law is a bad law that we currently have right now. All the minimum wage law says is that your work has to be worth $7.25 an hour before I hire you. On the unemployment rate in teenagers during the 1948, when the minimum wage law had been rendered useless by inflation, unemployment was only 9% for those kids, and now it's risen up to in the 30s and 40s in some cities.
Yeah, if I'm flipping burgers at McDonald's, shouldn't I have the right to demand $15 an hour? Because I'm valuable and my time is valuable, and even if I'm flipping burgers, I should get $15?
No, because
There's a direct correlation between the higher unemployment rate and the minimum wage, a higher minimum wage. So what these people like cities like New York City, they just passed $15 minimum wage, and so what we're seeing is people are working fewer hours and they're hiring less. So they're paying the same amount, but people are really getting less and they're hiring less. So it's useless.
plus if you got, let's just say you pay these workers less, the prices of the products they're producing will also fall with the wage because the cost to make the product has fallen, which will result the price to fall because it's a competitive market, and if I want to beat my competitors, I have to charge cheaper prices.
If I raise the minimum wage artificially, then I'm going to increase the price of my product, which means I'm going to be paying more. I'm making more, but now I'm paying more, so it really nets out.
But you also, well, you're assuming that people are willing to pay the price for that product also, because if my profits don't increase, then I'm going to have to fire some people or have them working less hours.
Or your business goes away altogether.
It's price elasticity.
That was my question.
Oh,
You
so
say,
sorry.
so conversely, you would say that it gets passed on to the consumer, just like a tax would. If they come in and increase your stormwater fees that you're paying or taxes, that's going to get passed on from the water company to
And you're
consumers.
eliminating jobs that we might not know about that aren't worth $7.25 an hour, but are still valuable entryway jobs in society.
Did you see that when healthcare was mandated and how that impacted employees?
When healthcare, okay, the consumer price index, it's the statistic that determines, like, it's another way to measure inflation. So it's like a certain amount of goods that America can buy with a certain amount of money. And the healthcare was right with it until 1965. Then it exceeded it greatly when we implemented Medicaid and Medicare, which was implemented July 30th, 1965. and now it's over double the rate of the CPI.
I was looking more towards the Affordable Care Act that was passed under President Obama and how that may have impacted employers and how they hired people. And,
a lot of businesses, so I think the requirement was with employees working full-time, you have to provide them with health care. And so a lot of businesses cut employee hours down to the minimum wage level so they would have to provide health care for them. So that would hurt hours.
And small business in general, and you were either forced to do that or pass the cost on through your product onto society.
There are also hiring limitations for when you had to start offering benefits to employees. Were there a number of employees?
I think it
Was there like a cap you had to reach?
If it was 100,
Once you reach so many employees?
I think it was 50, but I'm not positive.
So could you say that this law that was meant to help those employees by providing them with these benefits could inversely end up hurting them because now they're either out of a job, cut down to minimum wage, and wouldn't be able to get those benefits anyway because the employer doesn't have to provide them and pass that cost along?
So what do you make of a country like Vietnam, where, they after what they call the American War, was in complete distress, and now has a decent economy, a developing economy, but flourishes in tourism and ecology, and there's lots of industries doing really well there under their socialist policies.
So I'm not terribly familiar with Vietnam, but I did see that they are not considered repressed on the Economic Freedom Index, so they're not completely socialist. So I'd say it's more of a big slippery slope. But I'm not extremely.
I would also say a lot of the products these socialist countries are using were invented in capitalist systems.
Like what?
Well, in 2016, 42% of all new medical innovations came from the private sector of American healthcare, and Berkeley estimates that 78 to 90% of all medical innovations throughout history have come from the private sector.
Talking a little bit about tariffs. What do you guys know about tariffs?
They're not good.
I don't
Like that Trump's doing them.
So we have 4 cons for tariffs. They create a lower standard of living and higher prices. It causes inefficiencies and comparative advantages. It hurts complementary domestic businesses such as the automotive industry. So when Trump put tariffs on steel imports, it's hurting these homegrown automotive businesses like Toyota. And then sometimes it hurts industries it's intended to protect.
I thought Toyota was Japanese drone.
That hurts the plants in like Georgetown.
Oh.
I'd say another great example of tariffs really hurting America was I think tariffs were one of the main reasons we had the Great Depression, because after the 1929 stock market crash, unemployment was at 9% in December 1929, and then June 1930, unemployment was at 6.3%, and then right after that, the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill was implemented by Hoover, and over 1,000 economists from leading universities signed a public paper that said they should not do this, but they went ahead and did it anyway. And for the rest of the 1930s, unemployment was at double digits.
I think I know the answer to this, but tariffs more socialist,
They're not really
more capitalist.
socialist in nature,
Okay.
but it's just government control over the economy.
Well, didn't we say government control over the economy is socialism?
It's a policy intended to protect
Domestic
domestic.
producers.
Yeah. So I'd say it's neither, honestly, because it's supposed to protect domestic businesses while raising prices of foreign imports.
Okay.
So it does prevent free trade in the sense that the prices fall to consumers, and so they won't buy as many foreign products, or they won't buy as many domestic products.
So, based on your research for this project, you mentioned some statistics earlier about young people where they were falling as relation to their beliefs in socialism. After doing this and concluding your research, have you had any change of hearts of where you stand or how you feel about socialism versus capitalism? I feel almost silly asking you to because I know you, but you never know.
I just feel reaffirmed in my position.
I feel reaffirmed and I feel a lot better about the classical economic approach versus a Keynesian approach.
How do you guys feel about the social programs that we have in place here in the United States that you said don't necessarily line up with traditional capitalism, but have become safety nets in our society?
Yeah, so that's like a completely different argument than socialism, as we
Okay.
said. But so there are some pros.
I like arguments, Sam. Go ahead.
So a economist named C. Fritz Foley found a direct correlation between the crime rates and cycles of welfare payments. So as welfare payments were going into these 12 big cities, the crime rates would decrease, and then like halfway in between the cycles, the crime rates would rise again. And so these welfare states aren't supposed to be like a long-term solution, like food stamps and public housing. They're supposed to lift people and get them back on their feet. And another pro is it supports demographically children the most. They're also most affected by poverty. And so, but there are I would say there's many cons of these social programs. It doesn't really pull people out of poverty. There's an argument for the dependence pattern, which is if you stay as a child, if you stay in these welfare states, then you're more likely to stay on your whole life. And we're seeing a massive increase in spending on these social programs. In just 11 years, we saw a 36% increase from 202 trillion. I'm not sure what the beginning figure was.
I would much rather prefer just to, instead of putting all this money towards these programs, just to give these people who need the money, just give them checks and let them learn how to spend it themselves. And eventually, after so many years, stop giving them the money.
Let me throw out some social-like programs that I'm aware of. You guys tell me what you think. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they inherently good, inherently bad, or are they just a little bit of both? So like food stamps, you guys mentioned. Good, bad?
I researched food stamps for Bible. I think it's not inherently bad or good, but I found it is a pretty effective means of distributing food. It has a pretty big budget, and only I think it's less than 1% of that budget went to fraud, which of course has to be a little low, considering you're not going to catch all cases of fraud. But even then, 98 to 99% effective rate is pretty good, I'd say. So I'd say food stamps is it's a neutral.
Neutral. Caleb?
It's one of the, I guess, less worst ones. Like one of my
Less worst
favorite,
ones.
more favorite.
Can I get an English judgment on that?
Small
He cringed just a little bit. Just there.
One of the better ones, in my opinion. But I just prefer giving them.
I don't
money.
completely hate it, is what he's saying. Yeah, okay. What about Medicaid? We talked about that a little bit. How do we feel about that?
I'd rather just deregulate the medical industry and
Okay.
give people money to figure out what program they would prefer health insurance.
Sam?
I'm not extremely familiar with the healthcare, but I agree with Caleb. I think regulating the healthcare industry is time.
Well, because you're not familiar with it, I'm going to throw out another one. VA.
Okay.
You're welcome.
So, internal report in 2015 found the VA was wasting $6 billion a year. So, and their budget is $200 billion. And so, in the news recently, we've had some Congress people saying that the VA is a good system and that we just need to fully fund it, when the VA budget has increased astronomically in the last couple of years. Also, an article by the Washington Examiner found 9 major failures of the VA, and I'll just list them off here. Cockroaches in the kitchen and food at the VA, Chicago VA, and they stayed for multiple years. It was reported, but the higher ups were not doing anything about it. They sent death notices to living veterans, which cut off their benefits. They set up a suicide hotline, and when veterans called it, it went straight to voicemail, and then the voicemails were never checked. They had drugs passed out like candy, and earnings, which gave a doctor in Chicago the name of the Candyman. The Puerto Rican VA was accused of abusing elderly veterans. There were hundreds of thousands of medical records of VA patients put on Facebook. And this one is the worst, I think. So nearly a third of all veterans waiting to be enrolled in the VA's benefit system died before the VA got to their application. So out of 847,000 veterans waiting to be enrolled in their program, 238,000 died before the agency could get to their application. So that's just absurd.
So you would agree VA maybe not so great right now?
Yes, I would say basically any government intervention in the economy except for correcting externalities and providing public goods is not good.
Also, I volunteer at the VA like once a week on the weekends usually, and they usually have 10 to 15 patients there, and they usually have the same number of employees, which is just absurd because for most of the time I'm there, they're sitting on their phones doing absolutely nothing, and they're getting paid to do so. So it's
Administratively heavy.
it would be much better run than private.
That's why I promise you guys have any Pell Grants. We're talking about government-funded education grants.
I would say that's fine because it's a public good. We all benefit from an educated mass. Freedom cannot be preserved if people are not educated.
So speaking of education, what are the differences in the educational systems and structures under both systems?
I am not extremely familiar with the education system. I would argue, though, that there have been studies done that found that allowing school districts to have the value of choice found that it saves them a large amount of money. I think it was in
New York.
It was in New York. There was a study done that found, on average, they gave students a choice, like which school they wanted to go to, and I think it saved them around $8,000 a student. So I think it would be much cheaper to allow students to choose, and it would encourage competition and encourage the schools to do better.
So you don't like AOC's plan of free college for everyone, which
No, because the cost that how much it would cost the taxpayer to provide that college would not be worth the jobs that you need a college degree for. There are not as many jobs as people think that you need a college degree for, but since the government has gotten in the business of handing out student loans, it has decreased the value of a college degree because they're handing out all these student loans to kids who are getting degrees that will never be able to pay these loans back.
I've got a brother who's a professor in Sweden right now. He loves the fact that they have a free education system over there. He has a full class every time he goes to teach. You telling me that's bad to be able to educate the students in Sweden for free?
I would say when we were in New York, certain schools in New York, that we taught us about this, they would teach kids a certain skill. So I think it'd be better if it was education in high school was up to the localized level. So jobs that are needed in local communities could be taught, like welding or agriculture could be taught as an elective versus paying for, a $70,000 per year education.
I'm just gonna say it's not free because somebody has to pay for it. So the idea that it's free education is just not.
It's Mr. Sisk's favorite thing. Somebody has to pay for it.
Caleb, I have a question maybe for you specifically. A couple of times you've said, in particular about programs, you'd much rather just hand these people a check instead of having this program or something like that. What do you think about universal basic income?
I would prefer it over what we currently have, or I prefer negative income tax rather than universal base income, which is just a progressive tax for people below the poverty line, because it's not politicians who are providing these programs who have their own agendas. It is people choosing up within the market, and it's a much more natural way to help these people out, and it teaches them how to manage their own money. So after they're done with these government programs, or if they get out of them, they know how to spend the money correctly.
do you find politicians try to take a position, say we see some of the more recent Bernie Sanders, AOC, that they try to take a position where maybe they don't fully believe in socialism, but they embrace some of the aspects of it simply for votes?
I'd say it's a very populist approach to winning elections. One of the funny instances was somebody asked Bernie Sanders at a town hall, he made millions of dollars off a book he wrote, and they asked him if that was capitalism or not, and he said, no, but if you write a book, you can earn millions of dollars too. So it's ironic.
This Bernie Sanders, he raises his tax forms, and he makes around $600,000 a year, and he owns 3 houses, and is considered in the top 1% that he hates so much.
I just find it interesting that they take on in what you found in your research is that they would take on a certain view on socialism and try to gain votes, but when you look at the age group of who votes, unfortunately that group doesn't vote. The younger people don't vote like your older people. So why do you think they embrace it so much?
Well, if you add the word or the phrase